everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the M2 iPad Air and compare it against basically the Apple A14 bonding chip iPad Air 4 that came out back in 2020. Now, Apple is no longer selling the iPad Air 4, but you can still buy it in the used market, and the M2 iPad Air does come out in two different models, an 11-inch and a 13-inch model. The main difference is that the bigger one, the 13-inch model, is going to be giving you a bigger size battery and a bigger display. But for the basis of this video, I'm going to be comparing that base 11-inch iPad against the 4th generation iPad Air, because, we're comparing 11-inch iPads here, basically the same type of size that you were getting between both of these iPads. So if you want to pick up either one of these iPads, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both of these particular iPads, there is very little difference between both of these devices for the most part. You're basically getting the same type of exterior. And I do think with these particular, iPads that Apple makes, there's not really going to be too many differences I've seen from the exterior from one generation to the other. Even two generations, there's really not too many differences. The iPad Air 3 to the Air 4 was a big difference. The Air 4 to the Air 5, kind of a good difference, but the Air 5 to the Air 6 wasn't the biggest thing in the world. But the Air 4 to the Air 6, there's a lot of internal changes, which we'll talk about later in this video. Both are giving you almost 11-inch panels. There's slightly more color variations that you can choose from on the iPad Air 4. As far as I can tell, most of the colors that are available on the iPad Air M2 model were still there on the iPad Air 6, so it kind of just comes up to you which one you want to choose. But I think the iPad Air 6 is still very good, you're still getting lots of colors to choose from there. It basically has the exact same type of bezel around it, so the same amount of bezels between both, which is really nice. Really the only difference that you're going to get, as far as I can tell on the front side, is that the iPad Air 6 is going to be giving you that ultra-wide camera on the other side, so on the longer side, rather than the iPad Air 4, which is on the smaller side. So it's just a small thing. I think it is actually kind of a nice touch to have it on the other side. I feel like I'm so used to having my Face ID camera on the other way, but it just will take a little bit of time to getting used to. But beyond that, I think the iPad Air 4 still looks very, very good for being a 4-year-old iPad as at this point. Both have USB Type-C ports on the bottom, which is very, very nice. Some interesting stuff we'll talk about there too, but both basically are not Thunderbolt, they're just standard USB-C. Flat sides on both support Apple Pencil 2. On the back side completely, you're getting a single camera setup in the top left corner. You're getting their standard colors that you can choose from, the Apple logo in the center as well, and that kind of covers it up on the outside. I think both of these phones, both these iPads did a really good job with their devices, and they give you a pretty good device without being so crazy or being so insane. But there's still a lot of, similarity here for sure. You're not really going to be getting insane differences here as far as I can tell. And that's just kind of what happened with these particular iPads, at least on the exterior. So I want to say that again, on the exterior, that's what you were getting. Now from the price tag side of things, the current iPad Air 11 is basically selling for $600 for the brand new, Wi-Fi model, but it goes up to $749 for the Wi-Fi plus cellular model. Here's the thing, and I will say this again and again and again, if you're getting a used iPad from 4 years ago, that is going to be substantially cheaper than a brand new, iPad Air that just came out. So if you're trying to save some money and you're trying to get the one that might be a better bang for your dollar, something like an iPad Air, 4th generation might be the better one for some people out there. And that's just kind of what ends up happening. If I'm looking at a particular iPad, right, I'm looking at something like an iPad Air M2 model as being the most expensive iPad Air that you can buy, whereas on the iPad Air 4, it's going to be substantially cheaper, and that's the iPad that I kind of like for a lot of people out there. So if you're looking for a cheaper iPad that can still basically do everything you want it to do, an iPad Air 4 is pretty much up there, and it's substantially cheaper than something like the iPad Air, M2 model. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there as well. From the camera side, this is kind of everything at a high level. So with the iPad Air 4, you're getting a 12 megapixel wide camera, and on the front, you're getting a 7 megapixel, standard camera. On the iPad Air 6th generation, you're basically getting a 12 megapixel wide camera, so very similar to the iPad Air 4, but you're getting this landscape 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera that's on the front with center stage. This is by far one of the better things going on for something like the iPad, Air 6. It is giving you a little bit of a better camera on the front side. The back camera is basically more or less kind of the same thing. So there's not really massive differences from the back camera. They can do 4K at 60. The front camera is kind of the bigger difference here, because as far as I can tell, you're actually going to be getting that better front facing camera. And by getting that, face side, the landscape ultra wide camera, that's actually a very, very nice thing going on for this particular phone. And that is something I like a lot. if you're going through and buying a certain device, I like the fact that you can go through and get a really good landscape camera on this particular iPad. And another big thing is that with the, center stage, it's a really nice thing where you can go through and basically just be able to, utilize that center stage capability, which will basically just have you in frame in the center of the frame, no matter what you're doing. This in and of itself is another very, very cool thing going on for this particular, iPad. So just from the camera alone, I will tell you, you're going to be getting a better improvement overall on something like the iPad Air 6 over the iPad Air 4. So this in and of itself is another very, very cool thing, and it is something that I actually like a lot about that actual iPad. So take it as you will, but that's another very, very cool thing going on for that particular iPad when it comes down to it. In terms of the software, this is another very interesting thing. So when it comes down to both, on something like an iPad Air 4, you're going to be getting, standard software. It's iPad OS. Both these iPads are still supported with software, but because the iPad Air 4 is basically giving you the same exact chipset as something probably like an iPhone 12, we can only kind of assume that that iPad may last the same, if not a little bit longer than the iPhone 12. And considering the iPhone 12 probably still has like another 3 years of software updates, I would probably say safely, kind of conservatively, the iPad Air 4 is probably going to give you roughly around 3 years of software updates as well. So starting this year, it's going to last the remainder of 2024, 2025, and maybe will take you into 2026. So you still have a couple more years for the iPad Air 4, and that's a really, really cool thing going on for that particular iPad. And that is something I like a lot about it. Is it perfect? No, but it's still going to be lasting, use software for the most part. Whereas on the iPad Air M2 model, this iPad is just getting started. Like this iPad probably still has like 6 to 7 years ahead of it right now. And this is by far one of the biggest things and one of the biggest takeaways if you're getting one iPad over the other one. You have to keep in mind something like the iPad Air M2 model is going to be lasting a substantially longer amount of time than the iPad Air 4. So if I'm sitting here, right, and I'm trying to get an iPad, I definitely want to buy something like the iPad Air 4 because that's going to be giving me an overall better experience than something like the iPad Air M2 model. So that's kind of how I see it there too. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it is one of those things that I kind of look at as probably being an overall better takeaway or better buy than something like the iPad Air 4. So kind of keep that in mind there too. Not the biggest deal, but just one of those other minor things. On top of that, when it comes down to the performance, the iPad Air 4 is giving you the Apple A14 Bionic chip inside of it, where the iPad Air M2 model is giving you that M2 chipset inside. So when it kind of comes down to the numbers, you're going from a 6-core CPU to an 8-core CPU, and a 4-core GPU to a 10-core GPU. And this in and of itself was another very, very big difference, that if you're going from one iPad to the other, you're going to be getting a substantially faster iPad. And you're also going to be getting 8 gigabytes of RAM on the M2 iPad Air. So you're getting a substantially faster iPad, if you're a student trying to take notes or whatever, at the end of the day, you're going to be getting a much faster, just better performing iPad on the iPad Air M2 model. But the iPad Air 4 is still a really good performing iPad when it comes down to it as well. So what I can probably tell you is that if you have all the money in the world, go for the M2 iPad Air. It really is a good iPad, and considering it's $599, it's not like it's the $1,000 iPad anymore. And if you have like a $600 budget, or let's say you have a $500 budget, you might as well go up to the M2 iPad Air, maybe spend an extra $100, or wait a couple months, wait until you find a used M2 iPad Air, and just buy that one. But the iPad Air 4 is still a very, very good iPad. I'm a big fan of that particular iPad for sure, and I love that iPad. I think it's still very, very good. And that is that's a really good device I'd recommend people to buy as well. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.